it's a force bigger than the U.S. government. You're not pursuing the truth. You are, in fact, by definition, participating in a cover-up. That's my view. That can't continue. That can't continue. You can't have that.
It's a proxy for, can we hold these people accountable?
So recently, Tucker Carlson had a podcast concerning the truth about Epstein's death. Why the government story never made sense, all the abnormalities and inconsistencies in the tale that they still continue to sell, as there is apparently a total cover-up on this issue. This is in the context of a conversation with Darryl Cooper, who's done a deep dive into the Epstein saga, knows the case backwards and forwards, so I can't wait to see what he and Tucker have to say about this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And so they think this is an incredibly powerful guy. They're terrified. It took a lot of courage to come out. And so when they went and cut a deal behind the backs of not only the lead prosecutor, but the victims and the victims' lawyers, the thing was signed, done, deal before anybody below like Alex Acosta's level even knew about it. Again, including the Department of Justice lead prosecutor. They were really angry, because they had been telling these girls, look, I know it's scary, but you got to do this, and don't worry. We got this guy. He is going away for the rest of his life. You don't have anything to worry about. And then to have that happen behind their backs, they were really angry. And so they kept on the case. And they said, look, there is something out there called the Victims' Rights Act. You are legally bound to inform victims when you do something like this. You did not do that. This deal you made is not valid. And eventually a federal judge found that indeed the government had engaged, these are the words of the federal judge, had engaged in a conspiracy with Jeffrey Epstein to make this deal, this illegitimate, illegal deal. And so it got stricken, and that allowed him to be rearrested. And so that's why he was arrested in 2019 after, I guess it was
by the feds.
By the feds as he was coming back from Paris. His plane landed, and Bill Barr's Department of Justice. Bill Barr had just taken over the Department of Justice in, I think it was February 2019 or so.
Yeah, he's referring to the original plea deal, the sweetheart deal that Alex Acosta gave Epstein in, I think, 2007. It was either 2006 or 2007. His first charges for child molestation. He got 13 months, and they had 40 witnesses saying that, hey, he was procuring massages, under the auspices of massages to, sexually violate these women. And Ghislaine Maxwell was helping him out to that extent, too. And he was cut this sweetheart deal. He didn't go to federal prison at all. He actually went to the local prison and carved out part of the sheriff's department as his residency. He had an elaborate arrangement where he only had to be there for 12 hours for 6 days. He got a television installed for him, had guests coming through, was able to go all across the world on work release. This was his punishment for this sexual abuse case that, again, Alex Acosta did behind the backs of the victims, where the victims' insights and their inputs weren't taken into account. This violated victims' rights, and the lead prosecutor wasn't even made aware of this. And why? Well, Alex Acosta said, I was told that Epstein was intelligence and essentially to lay off him. And that's where we're at here.
Right after the midterms. And he has him arrested, and then everybody kind of knows the rough outlines of the story after that. He's in jail. There was the story of him being assaulted apparently in his cell by this gorilla that they put him in there with. You see the picture of the dude that they put him in with. He was a corrupt NYPD police officer who was in for a double murder of 2 drug dealers that he was offing for another drug deal, something like that. He's like giant bodybuilder dude, just a monster of a guy. And, they put little Jeffrey Epstein, a guy who's, for all of his evils, not a violent criminal, in a cell with that guy. That guy assaults him, and then he ends up dead under circumstances that, have been gone over again and again. And they're as insane and ridiculous and implausible as everybody says. I mean, for years, we were always told, this is just until very recently when they released that footage of the hallway outside his cell, that there was no footage, that all 3 of the cameras that were relevant to that area of the jail somehow had malfunctioned or gone out of service at the same time. And the guards who were on duty that night, they had fallen asleep, and the pages of their logbook for the pertinent time period somehow had gone missing.
Yeah, all sorts of tales on this and so many discrepancies because we heard those stories that the cameras malfunctioned, that the guards fell asleep, a combination of the two, which is hard to believe it just in its own right. But also when Kash Patel went on Joe Rogan, he seemed to imply that hey, the cell footage still existed and you're going to see it, but he might have been referring to this farcical footage released recently that doesn't tell us anything, that had time missing, that doesn't capture the area in which Epstein's cell even was. And how they thought they could sell this to the public is just absurd. I just don't, even if you're a total propagandist trying to cover this thing up, I just don't see how you can believe that the American people, especially skeptics, were going to, swallow this hook, line, and sinker. The other thing that's crazy about this whole story is that Bill Barr, the former attorney general and the guy who essentially Epstein was under his custody in New York, he was the son of Donald Barr, and Donald Barr was the one that hired Epstein in the first place at the prestigious Dalton School without credentials. He had no credentials, no teaching certification, no teaching experience, and that was his first job, the first time in which Epstein had a foray with underage fraternizing. He went to parties, he associated with young female students, and that was kind of, the forerunner to all the sexual exploits he engaged in thereafter. There's just too many crazy aspects of this story that are so unbelievable. You can't believe the government's tale.
Just all of these things, you're like, come on, man. Like, and a lot of times people say, like, because they have this James Bond idea of, these kind of things, and like, they would know, like, if this was really some kind of a murder or a, just maybe not a murder, but Jeffrey Epstein was told, the best course of action for you is if you go ahead and commit suicide now. The other options we're giving you are way, way worse. The guards are going to be off, sleeping for a little while. So take care of yourself. Whatever it was, you have this set of circumstances that's entirely implausible, and you have pretty much everybody who knew him, including his lawyers. His lawyers immediately, and still to this day, as far as I know, make the point. They're like, look, this was a guy whose hubris was off the charts. He had already gotten away with this once. He was now under arrest with a president that, I think personally, we'll see what happens. I just don't personally buy into the accusations of Trump having to do with Epstein. Just doesn't strike me as the personality type that would do that kind of thing.
Yeah, a few things here. Well, he was right about the lawyers. Actually, some of Epstein's lawyers, really, really rejected the fact that he had killed himself right away. I think among them is Alan Dershowitz, and their legal team actually had Michael Baden, the most prominent forensic pathologist probably living in the country today, take a look at Epstein's body, and he found that bones were broken in 3 parts of his neck, including bones that wouldn't break typically in a hanging. So this is just so many layers of inconsistencies here. And several other of his lawyers actually thought that Epstein could walk, that they could get this evidence thrown out, that there was overreach on the part of the prosecution. And some of them were actually optimistic, so they thought that there was even less sense then that he would commit suicide, just days away from, I believe, what was a bail hearing. Now, as far as Trump being implicated in these crimes, there's no reason to, believe that without evidence. I'm open to any kind of evidence that comes forward in this regard, but everything that I've read and learned about this case going back into history, and you guys know I am no fan of Trump, is that he had a very friendly association with Epstein in the 90s and early 2000s, but they had a serious rift in 2004, vying over the same beachfront property where a bidding war ensued. Eventually, Trump won it, and that alienated Epstein from Trump, it seems like forever. I haven't seen any substantial information to indicate otherwise, and when these crimes were supposed to have occurred, I believe was mostly after that. Now, there were a few accusations of Epstein involved in crimes earlier than that, I think in like 2002, and there was, coverage of this. I think he intimidated the journalist to make sure that went away. I think Darryl talks about that at a different part of this show. But there's no real evidence to indicate that. And frankly, I think Trump is involved in this cover-up for sure, but I think he would behave the same way in his engagement in this cover-up if it was someone close to him that was implicated, or several people close to him that were implicated, or several high-ranking lobbyists that were close to him that were implicated. So, yeah, there's going to be tons of conjecture about that, but without more evidence, I don't know. It seems like he never even went to Little St. James. He did fly in Epstein's plane a few times, but there's a lot of people of prominence other than him that did fly to Little St. James, and there doesn't seem to be as many accusations toward after the fact. And a lot of people met with Epstein after this conviction for sexual offenses, including Ehud Barak, by the way, who lived with Epstein for a prolonged period in Manhattan in that valuable residence he received from Les Wexner, and visited him 30 times that are documented after that.
But, you know, there are pictures of him out there. There was a relationship out there that maybe could kind of be leveraged, doesn't want embarrassment. There were, in other words, there were strings to pull. Like, it wasn't as if his appeals were exhausted and he's going off to prison tomorrow where, you know, you're going to have a bunch of boss crackers waiting for this new Jewish pedophile that just showed up and he's just going to kill himself. He had so many cards to play. And he had gotten away with it before. And nobody who was close to him during that time, even, including his lawyers, believes that he committed suicide.
Well, one lawyer, I spoke to his lawyers about it, and one said to me, well, he thought he was going to get out on appeal in days.
Yeah, right.
So it's interesting that the Bureau of Prisons, Department of Justice, has never released the names of the inmates who were in the lockup with him. He was supposedly in the cell by himself, but there were 11, I think, in that range, other inmates in the cell block, which was the maximum security cell block within the Federal Detention Center, the MCC. We don't know who they are. And we know that a bunch were transferred out shortly after, several were anyway. And somehow we can't know their names because HIPAA or something. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Right, and you'd think if there's questions about his death and the circumstances surrounding it, people would want to know that. I mean, if they were involved in any way in this, but, you know, they're cloaking this in additional layers of mystery, just like every other element. And as to whether it really is true that he was going to get off or not, I tend to think that that's looking at it optimistically. Darryl's right. He did have a lot of legal cards to play. This thing wasn't over, and he had tons of opportunities to commit suicide before this in, you know, his own residence if he wanted, etc., before going down like this. And like they said, he got away with it before, and he got away with basically the worst offense imaginable in the world when there were stacked witnesses against him, and it just didn't seem like there was any chance that he could have got such a great deal that he did from Acosta, who became the labor secretary later under Trump, by the way.
The guards who fell asleep were not really punished. They lied about the tape. And most damning of all, Bill Barr participated in the cover-up. I mean, flat out, you could read his memoir. In it, he says, as soon as this happened, my first concern was people would think he was murdered. Really, you're the chief law enforcement officer. You should hold open every possibility, including the most obvious, which was he was murdered. So if your goal from the very first moment was to convince people of something you didn't know was true, you're not pursuing the truth. You are, in fact, by definition, participating in a cover-up. That's my view. I'd love to know the other side of it. Bill Barr won't talk to me about it, though he's attacked me for saying it. But Bill Barr is participating in the cover-up. So what the hell is that?
Yeah, and when, again, to go back to what we covered earlier, I mean, with Bill Barr's history of covering things up for the intelligence community, both the Iran-Contra thing as Attorney General in the early 90s and as the CIA legal liaison to Congress during the Church and Pike Committee hearings, there's a history there, you know, of covering things up that have embarrassing ties to the intelligence community. And, you know, one of the ways that, like, I don't think Bill Barr, like, if he was your neighbor, I think he's probably a good neighbor. If you didn't, you know, if he was never...
Well, I know him. I've always thought he was a super nice guy, friendly guy.
I'm sure he's like, everybody who knows him thinks he's a good man. And, you know,
what matters is how you use your power. That's how you're judged.
Yeah, that's right, man. How you behave when you're coded in power and authority, when you are a ruler, you know, under the auspices of, you know, some representative of the people appointed by the president, but exerting rule instead of representation. That's what the deep state is now. That's what the deep state is my entire life. And yeah, it does seem like Barr went to great lengths to try to convince people that this wasn't a murder, rather than actually investigating whether it was a murder. That had to fall on, you know, skeptics and Epstein's legal team. He didn't even take that seriously whatsoever. They didn't even really try. They already had this narrative boxed out and ready to go that Epstein killed himself. And again, this is prominent Democrats and prominent Republicans both had the same narrative. In Biden's term, the Democrats didn't use this as a tool against Trump like they used Russiagate and the Jan 6 insurrection hoax and all of that nonsense, but they just did not touch Epstein, even though that this was the most obvious cover-up from the get-go that spanned multiple administrations, multiple institutions, multiple deep state entities, and the mysteries still linger. The questions still linger. We're still talking about it now, and I think there's a reason we're still talking about it now. Russiagate is confined only to the Rachel Maddows of the world that still want to talk about that, but this is a cause that united much of the populist right and dissident left, too, that never bought these answers that the government was providing.
And again, to go back to how people justify things to themselves, a lot of people, most people are not comfortable thinking of themselves as evil human beings or as people who are participating in or doing evil. And so they tell themselves stories to make it not that way. And, again, to me, a pervert like Jeffrey Epstein is like one small part of this story. To me, the whole constellation of forces around him that kind of coalesce to protect him and confuse the issue, and to this day is still, when I said Jeffrey Epstein has become a proxy for other things that are important, this is something, if there's one message I would like, if there's anybody at the White House or anywhere close to those people watching right now that they need to understand is the reason this is important to the base is not because they think there's this Jewish pedophile who worked for the Israeli Mossad and they want him held. It has nothing to do with that. It's a proxy for, can we hold these people accountable? Like Donald Trump's presidency in general, people might have favored the trade policy. Certainly they were, the immigration thing was important, all that kind of stuff. But really what it was is, man, these people have gotten so out of control and so out of touch with the rest of us and so unconcerned with what's going on with the rest of us. We just got to bring in a wrecking ball from the outside who's going to go in there and shake things up and tear this thing down.
People are not listening to us because we're irrelevant. We don't have any say in our government. There is no democratic control in the United States. The population's views don't really matter. That's the feeling that people have. And this whole story that you've told for 2 hours and 37 minutes confirms that they are right to be concerned, because what you're describing is an pretty organized, informally organized anyway, force or series of forces that operate outside and above the U.S. government and every other global government, or most of them anyway. And by definition, so the U.S. attorney, the federal prosecutor, the chief federal prosecutor in one of our biggest states is told back off and does.
Yeah, this is total lunacy, and Darryl's right. The thematic element that keeps skeptics, posted and kind of keenly aware of what's going on in this story is the fact that it's just blatant corruption perpetrated amongst multiple administrations throughout history. And these people, again, they operate beyond the law, above you and me. There's that mantra that when Trump was indicted on all those charges in 2024 and maybe 2023, they said, hey, this is proof that no one's above the law. Well, that's absurd. We know that people are above the law. That was selectively imposed upon Trump to try to stop him from winning. And he won too, but he's covering this up. He's involved in the cover-up. So Darryl's right. For that to be a big theme of the Trump legacy, of America First, of MAGA, whatever you want to call it, the fact that they were going to bring in this, supposedly anti-establishment force. By the way, I don't think you're really anti-establishment if you have Hillary Clinton at your wedding, but that's just me. They thought he would be a wrecking ball, and that's what a lot of Americans voted for, and that's why you're seeing such disappointment here when Trump acts in the exact same indistinguishable way from people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden regarding things like this, and especially this.
And everybody beneath him does also? So, what is that?
Yeah.
It's a force bigger than the U.S. government. And I just think that can't continue. That can't continue.
Yeah.
You can't have that.
And the nature of the crime, again, being that one crime that if you polled Americans, said, what's the worst crime?
Exactly.
I think it would make the top of every list of every poll that you could run, however you worded it. The fact that that's the crime, it makes it so that, when they tell you we bombed a car in Kabul and killed this family of 10, during the Afghanistan withdrawal, we can't really get into all of the details because of sources and methods and this and that and so forth. People will be like, okay, that I don't really like that, but fine. But a child's innocence, if anything is sacred, a child's innocence is sacred. And sacred means there is no compromise with regard to that. If you have to, if exposing the information about somebody like Jeffrey Epstein means that a Dr. Strangelove style nuclear device goes off and destroys the planet, too bad. Let justice be done, even if the heavens fall on something like that, because the crime is just, it's beyond the pale. It's something that for all normal people, they say, whatever your excuse is, national security, first of all, what does this guy who's a pedophile have to do with national security? But whatever your excuse is.
I've wondered since day one, what does that have to do with national security?
Yeah, whatever it is, the answer is no. Okay, we have a journalist who has a source, and this has not been refuted by the people involved, saying that he belonged to intelligence. We have all these ties over the years that provide more circumstantial evidence to back that.
Yeah, Ari Ben-Menashe is the journalist, I believe, that said that Epstein told him that he was part of intelligence working for Mossad. And I do think his intelligence connections are a big part of why this story needs to stay alive, why Americans deserve answers in that. But I think Darryl's right, too, in, the overarching context. It's about corruption. It's about people that are above the law and people that protect people that are above the law. And it spans, the gamut. It runs through the left-right paradigm, Democrats and Republicans, the party of stupid and the party of evil. It's a big club. We're not part of it. George Carlin said that. No matter the names, the deep state remains the same. It's just what it is. And, Darryl's right. That's why this can't go away. And a lot of the right wingers that supported Trump supported him for bringing transparency, not only on this, but issues like this, but also peripheral issues. The right in the culture war constantly talked about how they needed to oppose to the bitter end the exploitation of women. This is a child sex trafficking ring involving the violation of women. And if you just run away from it now, what does it say about your principles? I think Matt Walsh was right about it in his video where he said, if this hurts Republicans in the midterms, if the answers hurt Republicans in the midterms, so be it. We need answers on it. There's things in life that are more important than what hurts Republicans in the midterms. Amen, Matt. Thank you. I think that's, the perfect way to say it.
If the U.S. government had anything to do with this guy, if foreign governments operating on our soil had anything to do with this guy, we don't care what your excuse is. We're talking about a man who was raping children. And if our government, the people who pass laws that we have to follow, or else have men with guns show up to our house and drag us off to a cage somewhere, the men who make those rules, men and women who make those rules, this is something that we have to draw a line in the sand and say, this is too far. You are going to dump all of this, and we don't care what happens. We want an explanation of what was going on here. And we're not going to take no for an answer on it. This is too far. It's just too emblematic, it's too severe of a crime.
Right. We got to keep this in the news, keep clamoring about it until we get real answers. Not like, oh, you're going to get this Epstein phase 2. That's just grand jury testimony and nothing else, nothing regarding the search warrants. We're not going to try to interview Les Wexner about what he knows for the first time ever in history. We're not going to reveal any documented information regarding Epstein and his connections to intelligence associates, which we know exist. That's not a conspiracy theory. We know he had ties to Robert Maxwell and Adnan Khashoggi and others. That's just not. It's not going to be acceptable to say he had no ties to that. And Ehud Barak stayed at his house, lived with them prolonged periods. He was the chief of Israeli intelligence.
And I hope that I really hope that people will keep that mentality and not let this die until we get a good, satisfactory answer on what was going on.
Amen to that, and everything that you have said, I think, in a really measured, restrained way. I also notice about you, as I've noticed before, your total determination to see things through the eyes of the people you're talking about, whether you agree or disagree with them. You add humanity to history, which is why I value your historical analysis. I think it's the right way. It's the humane way.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with Tucker on that. That is Darryl's thing. He brings humanity to history. And, with all the content that he makes, whether it was on his Jim Jones series or his Israel series or his Jeffrey Epstein series, he always places himself in the shoes of others on various sides of issues, and including on the victim side, which, you know, gets trounced through the dirt so many times as it has in the Epstein saga, where these victims will never receive true justice. You know, some of them did receive a $290 million settlement from JP Morgan for them controlling the financial doings of Epstein's child sex trafficking ring. They basically say that in the judgment that was made there. That's not a conspiracy theory ever. But the victims will never get true justice here because those that were all the perpetrators don't seem to ever be held accountable, and I don't think they will be now. And I think Trump is part of the cover-up, whether or not he's implicated in any of the wrongdoing Epstein did. We know he was a friend of Epstein. I would like to see more information on that. Whether his name is in the files, I think, is a red herring too. We know he was friends with Epstein, and it seems like cooperated with the investigation as it was happening in his first term. His lawyers have talked about that too. And, you know, whether or not his name was in the files, I think is relatively immaterial. What's important is who was implicated in these crimes, whether it's Trump or otherwise. I don't care what party you're from. I don't care what part of the country you're from. I don't care whether you're in high society, low society, whether you're, you know, some figure that's never been mentioned. We want answers, and it's not just the answers that are going to come through grand jury testimony as they're saying, hey, we might release now. No, we know you're sitting on a lot more, including the information taken from Epstein's properties under the search warrants that happened and were executed in 2018. We know Epstein was tipped off to a lot of the searches that came in 2006, I believe, and that information leaked, you know, what do you know, to save him there. But there is other information. A lot of it was presented in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, but not all of that evidence has been divulged to the public. So, you know, Maxwell's sitting and languishing in a prison for, I believe, 20 years for sex trafficking to no one other than Epstein, apparently. There's just nothing that adds up in this whole thing. Epstein's death is only a small part of it. And it is an interesting part of it because if he was murdered, we want to know who and why and make those connections, but we'll never learn that. But what really I think is the most important is how much of the corruption within the system this reveals, and how much Americans are taking notice of it. Even some of Trump's most diehard supporters and activists are noticing it. Trump got ratioed for calling this a Democratic hoax on Truth Social and his Twitter accounts. And, you know, I think there's something telling about that. Twitter isn't real life to an extent, but it does show the cultural leanings of the populist, especially in the dissident world, and the people that follow him on social media. And there's something telling about that. I don't think he's ever really been ratioed like that before. But this is a scandal. It's probably the biggest scandal of his presidency, and unless they come clean, they might just have to suffer the ramifications of it. Trump doesn't have another election to run for, but he certainly doesn't have the political capital to pass the rest of his agenda if this scandal drags on. And, you know, I think it's his Watergate right now. It really is that coming to that level, and you see a lot of his supporters peeling away, and certainly dissidents peeling away from this and supporting him and saying, you know, I'm ashamed to have supported him after the way he's behaving here. So we'll see how this all turns out. Let me know in the comments below, though. Do you agree with Darryl Cooper? Is the whole Epstein story emblematic of the idea that some people are above the law and are just protected, and there's rampant corruption, and you know, that's the world in which we live, and that's what the Epstein story shows? Or do you think that there are more important aspects to the Epstein story, like his intelligence connections, how he made his wealth, etc.? Let me know in the comments below. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to Tucker too. Really appreciated this interview. Darryl's awesome. I'm proud to support him. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. You'll help me out financially and support the channel, which I appreciate. And in doing so, I'm going to give you access to all of my videos before they go live on YouTube. Until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.